Joel Rubin is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs in the Obama administration. He is joining us as we watch this situation unfold and explosions happening in Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine tonight. Civilians just waking up to a war that has begun, one that we have been watching and waiting for as well. Joel, let's start with what we're seeing and what your sources are saying about the situation underway right now. What are you hearing?
Thanks, Marnie and Leland. It's great to be with you both. I'm checking in with people who are connected to this on the ground, and one source is telling me that an attack may be coming from Belarus, which of course would be a separate country if that is the case, and that would be Russian troops coming from a third country heading south towards Kyiv. So that would add another very scary and dangerous dimension to this illegal, unprovoked invasion of a sovereign country, a democratic ally, Ukraine, and widen the potential challenges for containing it as well.
Yeah, Joel, I'm thinking about this sort of from a administration standpoint, if you're advising the president right now, as you did in the Obama administration, clearly whatever calculus that the administration made about Vladimir Putin didn't work. Do you bother trying to change the calculus, or do you view Ukraine at this point as a lost cause?
Well, Leland, definitively no, not a lost cause, because there are 41 million Ukrainians. They have a military. It's a country larger than Iraq, just to try to give a bit of a context for the viewers, and they are proud. They are proud, and they have a history. Unlike what Vladimir Putin tried to do a couple of days ago in a speech to whitewash the identity of Ukraine, there is a Ukrainian people. There is the Ukrainian country. We have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian Americans who will attest to that. And so, no, we don't give up on Ukraine, and we don't give up on Ukraine even if there is a full-on Russian invasion and occupation. We just don't do that. That's not who we are as Americans.
You may not be aware of what's going on. There already is a full-on invasion. We had a congressman earlier who said likely there's Russian airborne troops landing at the airport. You've got them taking out the Russians taking out the Ukrainian air defense systems. In roughly 2 days is the estimate that the Ukrainian military can hold on, especially given that the Russians now control.
I'm not sure what you're arguing. Then are you arguing that we should just tell Vladimir Putin that it's okay?
What I'm trying to ask is what does the Biden administration do? Because all the things they've done up till now and all the threats haven't kept Vladimir Putin from doing this. Is it time to change the paradigm and say, okay, either we are going to do something that Vladimir Putin doesn't expect and hasn't baked in, or we kind of have to just acknowledge that if he wants Ukraine, he's going to take it?
No, we don't acknowledge that a country can, by brute force, invade a democratic ally of the United States and take it over and completely overrun it. And what I'm saying is, if he does, is a context setting, because we have to see exactly what's happening on the ground to know for certain all of the different dimensions of this invasion. So that is the if, but it is, I agree with you, it is not a very strong if, because Putin has made it clear that he wants to invade, but it's not the role of the United States.
He hasn't made it clear he wants to. Joel, I'm sorry. No, the facts matter here, Joel.
Yes,
the spin out of the White House. Hold on. The spin out of the White House has been pathetic on this. You keep saying that the sanctions are going to prevent an invasion. Vladimir Putin went on television and said, "I'm invading." They have already invaded. This is not an if. We don't need to see.
That is
the question. Leland, Joel, let me ask the question. What can the White House do?
You're not letting me respond to you.
What I have. You've talked for over a minute. The question is, what can the White House do? What's on the menu for the president to make Vladimir Putin pull back from the invasion he has already launched?
Let me explain again. I am not going to accept the premise of the question, that is that the United States should somehow tell Vladimir Putin that he has the right to invade a neighboring country and take it and completely control it, and that's just the way we have to deal with it. No, that is not it. And what we are seeing right now is an illegal invasion of a neighboring country, a democracy. Mm-hmm. And what the role then is of the United States is to say clearly that is not an acceptable policy. That has been the consistent position of President Biden. It was not the
And
policy
Vladimir
of
Putin
President
doesn't
Trump.
care.
It was,
Joel, you've yet to give me one thing the White House is willing to do, can do, or should do, other than tell Vladimir Putin no.
That is not accurate. Actually, we have the most significant sanctions ever placed on Russia already, and more are going to be announced, I'm confident, in the morning.
And Vladimir Putin doesn't care.
Okay, Leland, I think what you're asking then is a false argument. You're asking a false argument because no, I actually don't. I do not want to answer a question that is phrased in a false way. The bottom line is this: if there is going to be a pushback against Vladimir Putin, that does not mean sending American troops in tomorrow and to start fighting Russians. That is not a possibility. This is Vladimir Putin's choice. But what we're watching right now is the situation where the United States is going to have to lead with our allies to isolate Russia, to condemn it publicly, and to make it known that this is not a cost-free invasion. There are troops, there are Ukrainian troops who will be fighting back. There are Eastern allies that we have to reinforce, that are our NATO partners, that are a clear red line not to trip over for Vladimir Putin. There will be massive sanctions underway, if not already now. They will be announced, I'm certain, in the morning, that will isolate their financial sector and punish them. And we will see what that does. If you're looking for a magic bullet, turn it off. That's not how international affairs works. That's never how it's worked. That's a very simplistic notion. What we have to do right now is deal with the reality that Vladimir Putin is invading. There was no way to prevent him from doing what he chose to do unless we were in his head. This was his choice. Now we have to deal with it.
And Joel, the reality is we're seeing some new images. And guys in the control room, can you roll that video again, if you may, of smoke rising into the early morning sky in Kyiv? Yeah. Joel, a senior U.S. State Department official said today that body bags will return to Moscow, underscoring that blood will be shed on both sides if Russia invades. We're seeing it happen. How extensive might the casualties be on both sides as we see the heavy populated city of Kyiv tonight under siege?
Well, I can't predict how bloody it will be, except to say that if past his prologue over the last 8 years, we've seen about 14,000 people killed in the eastern region, and the Ukrainians are not giving up. And this is a dynamic that can be very bloody very quickly. We even heard Vladimir Putin in his statement tonight obliquely refer to penalties if others intervene that they have never seen before, hinting at nuclear weapons potentially. We don't know where this ends, quite frankly, and this is a Vladimir Putin call. But the Russian people, they do at some level have a say over this, but we don't really know if they're going to return body bags. There's rumors that there are mobile crematoriums that the Russians have brought in to try to reduce that kind of return of young dead Russian soldiers, that the Russian people would ask, why are they dying in Ukraine? Our Slavic brothers are being invaded for what purpose? So this is not a dynamic that has a simple finish. Occupying a major city in the heart of Europe doesn't just terminate overnight. And there are 41 million Ukrainians who are not exactly going to roll over and allow their country to be occupied and have nothing to say about it.
And many of those preparing to fight in the days leading up to today. Joel Rubin, we appreciate your time tonight and your insight. Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.